We've learned so much Torah this week, Torah that's taking us to new heights and really into ourselves, to the depths of who we really are. We are learning Parshas Emor, realizing that the priests of the Jewish people are limited very much in their power. You could watch an entire explanation of that and how that is designed by God Almighty to let us know that each one of us has a direct relationship with our Creator, that no one can be an interposition in that. No one could say that they control the keys to our relationship with God Almighty. And this applies to every single human being. Like we learned together that every single human being, the Rambam says, could take on to sanctify himself, Kodesh Kodeshim, to be holy of holies. This is the incredible gift that the Torah is giving to every single human being, the ultimate decentralization, the ultimate bringing every human being to an unrestricted access to their Creator, to God Almighty, at every moment, at every time, in every place, for every single person. And we also learned how the Rebbe put into Hayom Yom an actual guidebook to Sfiras Emor. Instead of thinking that Sfiras Emor, as we recite the counting of the 49 days between Passover, Pesach, and Shavuos, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, what do these numbers mean? What do the spheres mean? The Rebbe already explained them to us in Hayom Yom, correlating every day. Watch the videos. You'll see links at rabbismith.org, and you could watch them also in this channel and get to understand the service of turning our hearts from just the chaos of the distractions of the everyday world into the service of God Almighty. And we also learned, in terms of turning our minds and our hearts from the distractions of the world, we've been learning in the Rabbi Steif learning on Sunday mornings about Tamim Tiyeh, how we need to be wholehearted with God Almighty, and how being wholehearted with God Almighty is, according to the Ramban, Nachmanides, an actual commandment. That it's not merely that we shouldn't go after divinations and should not go after sorcery and trying to predict the future, which everyone is unfortunately trying to do that. Even today, it used to be that people read the news once a day. They got a weekly newspaper, they got a daily newspaper, then they came about radio and they listened to the radio every night. But there was kind of a time in between. Why are people listening to the news? Because they want to know what the future holds. It's really a process of sorcery, trying to figure out and put all the pieces together. What's going to be the next move? What's going to happen next? And everyone then sits around and talks about it and pontificates about it, what they think is going to be in the future. Now we've got to such a obsession with knowing what the future is. We are taking something called a Twitter feed, WhatsApp groups. We are taking all kinds of different things where people are constantly, we're trying, what's the latest? What's the future going to hold? And what can we know about what happened now? And analysis of the past to try to figure out the future. The Torah is telling us to scrap all this. This is just purely misapplying the divine gift of thought. We're misoccupying our time and energy. And instead, you can turn all that off and you can be wholehearted with God Almighty and know that everything that He is going to do and He is doing and He has done and is for our benefit. And that's what we learned this morning with the Beis Halevi, our guide to being certain that God Almighty has taken care of us in the past, the present, and will so in the future. And He tells us an incredible example of Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, the righteous one, that when Paro tried to trick him in twisting a slight detail about the dream so that Yosef HaTzadik might make a mistake, Yosef HaTzadik realized that this man, even though he wanted to do something to harm Yosef HaTzadik, to harm Joseph, he realized that it is from heaven, it's from God Almighty, and therefore it's for his own good. And he realized that both at one time, not to repeat that false information because it is false. He knew it wasn't true, but he knew that in the false information carried the key to the salvation, because the inserted false information gave him an insight into the truth. And this, my friends, is the guidebook for us on how to understand that we do not need to fear the future, because we know that everything that God Almighty is going to do for us, we're concerned if we're going to turn off the news, we're not going to know what's being planned and what's happening next. Well, if we know that God Almighty is taking care of us, we can release the resentments about the past and resentment for all the people that have supposedly in our imagination harmed us, in our misguided understanding, thinking innocently that it was their independent actions and God was not with us. When we realize God Almighty did it for our good, we can release our resentments about the past. We can release our disturbances about the present and the agitation we have at what people are doing, knowing that God Almighty is doing this right now for our good. And then we can look, what is the message? What is the good? And we can release our fear about the future because we are no longer dependent in it looking a certain way, because we know that God Almighty is taking care of us and is doing it for our good. And when we see that, when we're wholehearted with our Creator, not only is our health improved, not only is our heart whole, so it's not scattered with anxiety and stress and grief and remorse and guilt and shame and all the things and the resentments and the anger and all the chaos of the diffusion of our energy, but we are able to actually pay attention to exactly what is really happening, what is really being sent towards us, and learn from it, since we now can credit it to the real cause, the real source, which is God Almighty, not some stray, wayward human being who's out to get us, but rather God Almighty is doing this for our good. Now we can say, what is the lesson from this? What is something that I can learn? How am I supposed to now pull my divine energy together into a concerted, directed effort to be of service to my Creator, be of service to myself, to be of service to my family, to be of service to my community, my people, the world? And that is what Sfiras Emor about. Sfiras Emor is saying, counting each day as a significant day to pull all these disparate energies that want to fly in all kinds of different directions based on the distractions of the moment, and say, no, I'm not making you available, my dear power of aspect of love, my dear aspect of focus and discipline, my dear aspect of compassion. I'm not going to let it just fly whatever is over, whoever sent the latest tweet and whatever the latest news anchor says about what's going to happen and the latest email about the threats of this and that. No. I am going to hold these as my sacred opportunities, the sacred divine energy, to bring it back into what? Like the Rambam says, when telling us that every human being can reach the level of Holy of Holies, to be sanctified as holies, he says that we return to the straightness that God Almighty created us with. We don't actually have to do anything to change ourselves. We just have to give up the distractions and return and settle back into who we really are. And this is just as natural as dropping your keys. If you could let go of your keys and your keys are going to fall to the ground, you could also let go of all these distractions and all these ideas of what you're supposed to be doing, what you're supposed to be thinking, what you should have been doing, and what's going to happen next, and how can you figure it out, and how can you hedge, and how can you control, and all these kind of things that you could say, enough. I'm here right now with my Creator. That's all I need to know. And then you're automatically filled with all the full faculty of these beautiful attributes, the clarity of mind and the full faculty of all the beautiful emotional attributes that now come to bear, to be of service to us, to be of service to others. And then we could be consistently loving, consistently focused, disciplined, and compassionate, and persistent, and both persistent inside and persistent outside to bring goodness into the world. And we could be focused on establishing stable relationships. And we can be focused on the humility and the nobility and the expression of the divine wisdom to everybody else. This, my friends, is what we've learned this week. This is how God Almighty is bringing us to a new height of understanding. And this is what tells us that tonight is Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. Whoever heard of such a thing? A holiday, and then there's a second go at it, because the Torah is teaching us that it's never too late. It's never fallen. Whatever we have mistakenly focused on, how we have messed things up in the past, and we didn't get ourselves correctly focused, and we got distracted by all the tweets and all the posts and all the messages and all the things that we were taught to scare us and so forth. on all sides of the spectrum, all chaos. So we wasted it. We for sure wasted a lot of energy. But now that is not what our calculation is. Our calculation is that right now, here and now, Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, even if intentionally we knew we were misfocused, we can now say, I'm ready, God. I am ready to be connected to you. I'm ready, like the Rambam says, I'm ready now to turn my life, to dedicate to the Davas Ruchai, the gift of our heart, a gift of our spirit, to God Almighty, that I am ready to just return to who I really am, and what happened in the past and all the missed opportunities are completely irrelevant. And you know why they're irrelevant? Because it says that when a person truly, wholeheartedly returns to God Almighty, that his mistakes are turned over to merits. And like it says in the book of Joel, it says that the God Almighty will make up what the damage caused by the locusts, from the plague of the locusts, he'll make it up many times over. Meaning to say that we are wasting our time in regretting opportunities we didn't take advantage of in the past, or the way we didn't conduct ourselves properly. It's a total waste of time. Because leaving aside the fact that God Almighty had a plan, and everything that happened to us was exactly the way he intended at that moment in time. But not only that, he also has a plan that all the things that we think we could have profited and we could have done and we could have experienced and things could have been different in the past, we are going to have that filled up for us many, many times over, in our own experience of our own tranquility, in our experience of our connection to God Almighty, in our the experience of loving relationships between husband and wife, between parents and children, between siblings, between family members, in the loving experience of being in connection with community and people and humanity as a whole. All that is going to come in a way of an experience that we can't even fathom, that's going to be many times over what we are imagining that we missed. And that's the lesson of Pesach Sheni. And if you miss Pesach Sheni, there's Pesach Shlishi, the third Pesach, and there's the fourth Pesach, and there's the fifth Pesach, because every moment of creation is a new Passover. It's a new opportunity to take that leap from the overextending ourselves into the attempt to try to recreate ourselves into what we think we should be and what we think other people want us to be, and recreate other people into the world into what it should be, and to sleep into the absolute wholeheartedness with God Almighty, that it is exactly the way it is right now. And then I'm able to bring my energy, my divine energy, to apply it as God Almighty will direct me, to actually bringing about productive, positive, consistent, and lasting influence on myself and everyone around me. And that applies to every one of us, because like the Rambam says, this is a message for every single human being right now, where you are, who you are, no matter what you've done in the past, the truth of who you are is unaffected by all that. And you have the opportunity to now just relax into who you really are, with joy and with love, with understanding, and with the recognition that you're being lovingly taken care of by God Almighty, have been, are, and will always be, will be. And that, when my friends, when we are in that state of mind, that is what the redemption looks like. That's what Mashiach looks like. It looks like a world when everyone is settled in that understanding. Everyone is settled and grounded in that experience. Everyone is settled and grounded in that feeling. And that's why there'll be no more competition, no more war. It's not only because there will be more things, so therefore we won't have to compete for them, because there's going to be enough fruit and vegetables and wheat. But in our state of tranquility and certainty that God Almighty is taking care of, we will perceive the reality that there already is more than enough for all of us. And not only is there more than enough for all of us right now, but there's more than enough for many multiples more of us. Not just 8 billion people, but 80 billion people, and even more than that. There's enough abundance as soon as my mind set is moving from paying attention to all the stray thoughts and confusion and chaos that other people want to throw at me, and in addition to my own chaos that's coming and surfacing for me, and I go into the tranquility and the knowing and the wholeheartedness with God Almighty, I will see, my eyes will be open to the reality that is right now, that there is that abundance. And there is a whole humanity, a world teeming with human beings that are all ready for this experience. And when we see the world that way, when I see the world that way, when you see the world that way, we see our fellow human being this way as just being one thought from being holy of holies, then, my friends, we will actually take the leap individually, and we'll take the leap together into a completely new feeling and experience, an unlimited feeling of the closeness with God Almighty, an unlimited experience of the knowledge of God Almighty, unlimited both in experience, in the length of the breadth of the experience, the depth of the experience, and also the length of the experience, being that it's going to be permanent. God bless you all. Have a beautiful Shabbos, a good Shabbos, and a beautiful Pesach Sheni with you and your family, and spread this message of hope to the entire world. God bless you all.